Good evening, everyone. We're just going to take a few extra minutes as the 5 o'clock hour rolls into the 5:05 hour to allow those who are coming in to arrive. But make yourself at home for the next couple minutes, and we're so happy to have you here for this Mapmakers Alumni Institute event. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. Okay, well, welcome everyone to our spring Mapmakers Alumni Institute. This is a bit of programming that we've been doing here at Pacific going back a number of years now. And what I would like to do to start is introduce myself. I'm Scott Korb, if you haven't had a chance to meet me. I direct the MFA program here at Pacific University. And I'm so delighted to host, that we in this program are hosting this event tonight. I'm going to put in our chat here the program for the evening. And this program contains links to every one of the Mapmakers Alumni Institutes that we've done throughout our time in the program. So you have links to see any of that you like. And I am actually going to do something we haven't done before, which is to turn over the Mapmakers Alumni Institute to the people it really belongs to, which is our alumni here at the MFA. In particular, I'd like to turn this over to a member of our alumni council named Melissa Johnson. And Melissa is a recent graduate from Pacific with, of course, her MFA in fiction. She writes fiction and is currently working to complete her novel, which expands on the thesis she wrote titled Threshold. As I say, she now serves on the Pacific Alumni Council as part of the Pacific Basin subcommittee, our subcommittee on the Alumni Council that is most deeply engaged with equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. I would be remiss if I did not thank Njara, Marcia, and Dawnie for being with us tonight, but those introductions will come in a moment. Have a really wonderful night, all. I'm here with you, just in the background. So take it away, Melissa. Thank you, friend.
All right. Thank you, Scott. We are hosted tonight by the Mapmakers Alumni Institute, which is now housed in the Alumni Council's Pacific Basin program. And Pacific Basin focuses on broad alumni engagement across all genres and years, with an eye towards increased outreach. The name Pacific Basin is not only fitting because it shares the name Pacific with our university, but it was chosen to signify inclusion, as the physical Pacific Basin is the largest ocean basin on Earth, covering nearly a third of the planet's surface, and is significantly larger than any other ocean basin. In fact, the Pacific Basin is large enough to hold all the Earth's continents. And that's a fitting metaphor for inclusion, as no continent, no country, no people can be excluded. And the mission of Pacific Basin is to create a platform for programming, multiple initiatives striving for capacity building, grounded in all aspects of inclusion in the areas of craft, connection, and community. And what is wonderful about this following session is that it fulfills each of those purposes. So truly, I'm so pleased to be introducing my friend and sister alum from Pacific University, Njara Hamilton, in her session tonight, Literary Soundscapes. If you've not seen the program from Scott, I'll read her short but impressive bio here, her creative bio. Njara Hamilton is a Jamaican singer, songwriter, storyteller, and scholar. She is the author of Phonographic Memories, Popular Music, and the Contemporary Caribbean Novel, and her numerous essays on Caribbean literary and cultural studies. She received her MFA from Pacific University, where she was a Kwame Dawes Mapmaker Scholar. Her fiction has appeared in Centripetal, Caribbean in Transit, and Pre, and has won the support of fellowships and residencies from Oxbelly, Tin House, Press, Pre, and NAPRA Arts. She is currently working on several projects that interweave scholarship and creative writing, a nonfiction book about Caribbean time travel narratives, a collection of personal essays on music and memory, and a novel inspired by reggae and dub. I first encountered Njara in an online writer's workshop part of the Strata series hosted by Pacific University. It was here that I first heard that infusion of her Jamaica heritage, creating that wonderful cadence of her speaking and reading voice. So when we met in person on the Forest Grove campus at Pacific for our first June residency, I had already made a fast friend. Since then, we have been residency roommates, been in workshops together. I read her MFA thesis novel, Everything I Read, which she boldly and unapologetically writes in the lyrical rhythms of Jamaican patois. As the student on her thesis committee, I know that she does write as a soundtrack, causing me to note that the change in the pacing of certain chapters in her writing is similar to the change between a 33 RPM and a 45 RPM record. She was the keynote speaker of our graduating class of 2024, where she brought people to their feet for a standing ovation with her stirring call to our humanity in these tumultuous times. I know Njara's first language is music. She sings beautifully, and she is such a talented writer. She's been writing since she could put pen to paper. So if you were to draw a Venn diagram of music and writing, the intersection would surely be Njara. You can tell that I have nothing but accolades for my dear friend, so it's my pleasure to turn over our session to the talented Miss Njara Hamilton.
Oh, Melissa, you're gonna make me cry. That was so touching. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be introduced by you and to be here with you and all of my Pacific friends for this Mapmakers Alumni Institute. Thank you so much, Scott, for leading and insisting on the continuity of this program, which means so much to many of us in the program and as alum. I'm very grateful to the Pacific Basin, the Alumni Council, who've taken over the leadership of this work. As Scott mentioned earlier, it was really important to me to know that the mission of the Mapmakers Alumni Institute continues. And I'm so delighted to be in conversation with, if you know me, these are my two favorite novelists and two of my favorite novels of all time. And so I've raved to many of you about these works. And so I'm so excited to welcome Dawnie, Walton, and Marcia Douglas to this space. Thank you for all of you who are gathered here this evening or morning or whatever space time you might inhabit. And of course, Marcia and Dawnie, thank you so much for accepting this invitation to talk together about the craft of writing about music, to talk about craft at all, but to talk about what I think is really a stunning achievement in both of your novels. And some of you might know that 2 summers ago, I had the pleasure of taking a Tin House workshop with Dawnie, and so I wear the badge of a Dawnie, as our cohort calls itself. But beyond being a really just delightful and stunning debut novel, the final revival of Opal and Nev was really for me a transformative encounter. In a moment when I was still struggling to find form for my own musical novel, this novel kind of just gave me a really beautiful blueprint of what's possible. And so I hope that in this conversation, we'll talk a little bit about the possibilities of a novel or work of fiction and nonfiction that is fully infused by music in particular ways. I haven't met Marcia in person, but I feel like your niece and you're my auntie. We're both Jamaicans, and when I read your work, maybe around 2018, I first encountered Marvellous Equations. That book really has been a constant companion. I've taught it, I've written about it, and I'm still trying to figure out what on earth to do with it. It's wonderfully brain-breaking, but among the things that I'm excited to introduce to our community, if they don't know your work, is the really provocative and generative work you're doing, experimental form, infused by sound and with repercussions about time, temporality, chronology, and so on. And for those of you who don't know, Marcia just released a new novel a week ago, which I inhaled. It's delightful, and I can't wait for you to discover it as well. And so I'll do a more formal introduction of Marcia and Dawnie. I'll invite them to read a selection, a musical selection. We're going to play DJ tonight with their prose. And then I'll ask them some questions about how they kind of crafted these works. And then we'll save some time for your questions before we close things out. So Marcia Douglas works across fiction, poetry, and essay forms. She's been the recipient of awards and fellowship from Creative Capital, the Whiting Foundation, National Endowment for the Arts, and the UK Poetry Book Society recommendation. She's the author, most recently, of the Jamaica collection of the Shante Dream Arkive with ARK, being Dreamity, Algorithms, Chance, and Riffs, which is just a beautiful mouthful, as well as the Marvellous Equations of the Dread, a novel in bass rhythm, which was longlisted for the 2016 Republic of Consciousness Prize, Notes from a Writer's Book of Cures and Spells, Madame Fate, and Electricity Comes to Cocoa Bottom. She's also the Director of Creative Writing and a college professor of distinction at the University of Colorado, Boulder. Please welcome Marcia Douglas. Welcome, Marcia. Thank you so much for being here. Dawnie Walton is the author of the final revival of Opal and Nev, winner of the 2022 Mark Twain American Voice in Literature Award, the Aspen World's Literary Prize, the VCU Cabell First Novelist Award, and the Audie Award for Fiction. She's a co-founder and editorial director of Ursa Story Company, an audio production venture celebrating underrepresented voices. And along with Disha Philia, co-hosts its wonderful podcast dedicated to the art of short fiction. Please subscribe. And you guys spun off, like there's like a second project right under, under this rubric. It's really great. Formerly an editor at Essence and Entertainment Weekly, Dawnie has received fellowships from MacDowell and Tin House, an MFA from the IO Writers Workshop. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband and daughter, and is at work on her second novel. Please welcome Dawnie Walton. Thank you so much, Dawnie. So good to have you. Yeah, Dawnie, since your mic is open, could I invite you to read a selection from your work for us?
Sure. First of all, thank you everybody for coming. For those of you who haven't read this novel, just a little bit of background about it. It's written in the style of an oral history. It has a journalist character as the narrator, and she's interviewing the rock stars at the center of the book, the title characters, Opal and Nev, and all the players around them, including their producer, Bob Hayes, their label owner, Howie Kelly, Opal's future stylist, Virgil LaFleur, all of whom show up in the excerpt that I'm going to read. And basically, Opal and Nev had a very brief moment of infamy in the early 1970s and then flamed out. And the book is sort of looking at their a bit of a comeback moment in 2016. And so the journalist character is looking at this kind of cult duo and what happened that made them fall apart. And missing from the interviews, very notably, is a drummer named Jimmy Curtis, who happens to be the journalist's late father. And it's not a spoiler to say this because this is revealed in the very first paragraph of the book, but Jimmy Curtis is killed during a riot at an Opal and Nev concert in 1971. And so this happens before the journalist is born, and she is sort of investigating Opal and Nev to learn more about her father, as well as this taboo rock duo that she's always been fascinated with. And so the selection I'm going to read tonight recounts the anxious recording of the first Nev Charles album that features Opal Jewel, and the album is called Polychrome. And it starts off with a little bit from the journalist character giving context, and then it just goes into transcript. I will warn you that I do not do accents. Nev and Bob are British. I'm not going to attempt to do that, but I do recommend the audio version of the novel, which people seem to really love. It has a full cast. So this is the top of chapter 8. It's called Skinny Minnie and a Whole Lotta Look. On August 14th, 1970, the players for the Polychrome concept album were scheduled to gather at Rivington Records. Each of the 10 songs, which Nev had meticulously reconstructed from memory for Hayes, and the session players just 3 days in advance, included a color in its title, and, true to the artist's signature style, told a vivid story about an offbeat character. To achieve the organic sound Highs heard in his head, the album was to be captured live, with the assembled players recording each song straight through after a few practice takes. In addition to my father on drums, Highs had recruited an impressive roster, musicians who had some experience working together but had never before played on a Rivington album. Bassist John Squine, the rare white colleague with whom my father was friendly. Keyboardist Solomon Krebel, and second guitarist Steve Pratt, who was brought in to amplify the album's louder numbers, including the brittle, high-octane rocker Chalk White. A talented college senior at New York University, Jason Moore, came in as intern/engineer, providing some relief to the stretched budget. Brimming with ideas for the evocative album Nev had delivered, Highs arrived to the studio in high spirits, he recalled, and felt a surge of excitement as he watched his lineup of backing musicians arrive and begin tuning up. His heart sank, however, once his frontman walked in. Bob Highs, producer. Nev looked horrid and ghostly pale, as if he hadn't slept. Dark circles under the eyes and a patchy scruff that made him look like my baby daughter at feeding time, bits of carrot round the mouth. Worse than that, he was giving off a pungent odor. Flop sweat, I suppose. He shook hands with Squine and Solomon and Steve, solemn, and then he got to your dad, who wouldn't shake his hand and only gave a terse wave with one of his drumsticks from behind the kit. And I thought, if Jimmy's already unhappy, this is not good. Nev strapped on his guitar with no small effort, and then Howie popped over in full bellow and clapped him on the back, the attaboy kind of thing, and Nev went concave, literally concave. I pulled him aside and asked, what in God's name, Nev, are you ill? That's when Opal made her entrance, as Opal does. Opal Jewel. Virgil had come with me as far as the doors of the Rivington building, but he wouldn't come inside. In the movies where little Bobby or Sally nurses a wild animal back to health and then releases it back into the woods, and it's this big, brave moment with the violins going, "Go on now, this is your home, this is where you belong." I swear it was like that. Virgil thought he was in one of those damn movies, and I'm looking back at him like, all this and you just gonna send me to the wolves? I went inside and up to the Rivington floor, and the first person I'd see is Rosemary, who was a secretary, sitting at the desk. Pretty normal Rosemary with her shiny brown curls and shiny pink lips and those luscious titties she had sitting up so nice. Meanwhile, here I come breezing up, skinny Minnie and a whole lot of luck. I should have felt like a circus clown, I guess. Most people would have. When I opened my mouth to tell her who I was, that I was there for the recording session, my voice came out strong and steady. I guess that's when I knew my normal is to be abnormal. Rosemary Salducci, Secretary, Rivington Records. Oh, I'll never forget it, the first time I saw her. She looked so gorgeous you wouldn't believe. Like a page from Vogue magazine come to life. Bob Highs. She looked like Holiday on Mars. Howie Kelly. She looked like a fucking cockatoo. Is that the one with all the colors? Parakeet, parrot, whatever. Crazy nut. Nev Charles. She finally came to me. And when she did, I almost fell into hysterics, not because I was having a laugh, but because I was so relieved and astonished and ecstatic to lay eyes on her. All those feelings in a rush at the exact same second. She's the fashion heroine, so she can tell you the correct terminology for whatever it was she wore. Or better yet, ask Virgil LaFleur. I'm sure he recalls each stitch and accessory. All I can say is that there was this riot of yellow and cobalt and emerald and red, all cascading down her body tip to toe, and her shoulders poked out from it so that she looked sharp and majestic and rather compelling. And so my eyes are dancing all over this getup, and finally I get to her head, shaved to the skin. Fucking well done, fucking well done. Bob Highs. Suddenly the flush was back in Nev's face, and before she could say hello, he literally ran over to Opal and picked her up and spun her, and the studio was so tight with equipment that her foot hit your dad's bass drum and nearly knocked it over. Of course, we were very confused by all this. We had no notion of what had been going on, but Nev's delight was pure and infectious. Even Jimmy seemed mildly interested rather than annoyed by the creative insanity that felt possible before any of them had played a note. John Squine, bassist, polychrome. Bob Hayes is a brilliant producer. Strategic in the studio, each mic precisely placed. That's not to say he wouldn't let us get loose with the music itself. Nev would improvise on the lyrics, change them up here and there, but every day Hayes would dictate the order he wanted us to record in, and there was usually a good reason behind it. Take the polychrome record. I was expecting we were going to go straight through that thing, recording in the order Hayes had sent the songs to us originally. Instead, he insisted we nail down Yellow Belly and Girl in Gold the first day, even though those were toward the end of the schedule. Whatever, it didn't bother us much because we were so good together. We were ready for anything. But then watching Opal, I realized why Hayes was doing that. Both those songs had Nev heavy on the lead vocal. Opal had simpler parts, a few oohs on the chorus, and only 1 or 2 lines to sing. Hayes was letting her ease into it. He was giving her time to observe and learn, because the way she was looking around, concentrating so hard with those painted-on eyebrows knit every time he gave a note, it was clear she didn't know what the hell she was doing. At one point, Jimmy muttered to me under his breath, "I'm going to give this exactly 3 days." Bob Hayes. She arrived in her full regalia, full of swagger, but this was a room of professionals. We couldn't be tricked. Her lack of experience was clear from the start. Not that Nev was loads better. Jason Moore kept tittering that the guitar was out of tune, but at least he knew somewhat how the process was supposed to go. On the small backing parts Opal had, she sang loud and confident, which was promising, except that she nearly blew poor Jason's ears out in the monitors because she was standing much too close to her microphone. When I gave her a pop filter to attach, she turned it over and over in her hands until Solomon had the good sense to help her clip it on. And then again with the microphone, well, this was rather charming. But on Yellow Belly, one take was good and raucous, and everyone was smiling and nodding as they all built to the end. And at the last bit, Opal got overexcited and grabbed at her mic like I suppose she'd seen rock stars do on telly and sent the whole apparatus crashing down. Your dad and the other players were livid because it was the best take of the day and they thought she'd ruined it. But when Jason and I played it back, the crashing noise was actually quite clever. It was like this unexpected crescendo that made sense in the context of the song, which, you know, is this rollicking thing about a draft dodger on the lam. So that's actually the take you hear on Polychrome, the crashing of the equipment at the end, and then Nev's hysterical laughter. Opal Jewel. You can't compare performing on open mic nights to what this was. This was creating something new that was living and breathing. Here you had these guys, really good guys, who could do more than just play instruments. They could play emotions and adjectives. You get what I'm saying? Like we do a first take and Nev would say it was good, but the way he heard it in his head was more whimsical. Don't you know these guys would switch it up for the next take? Pluck or hit something a teeny bit different so that the sound had more looseness, more silliness, even though it was the same notes? I was like, wow, that was incredible to me. That was magic. It's true that I had a lot to learn about the process, but I got so wrapped up in everything and being with Nev in the center of this hurricane that my excitement kicked my nerves right on up out the room. Up till then, I had spent so much time freaking the hell out that I had not made room for the notion that, hey, this might be fun. And I'll stop there.
Wow. Wonderful, wonderful. One of my favorite passages. Thank you so much, Dawnie. Marcia, would you read us a selection?
Thank you, Dawnie. That was lovely. So I'm going to read a short passage from the Marvellous Equations of the Dread. And I wouldn't really say that this passage is about music, but it's triggered by music. I would put it that way. It's triggered by music in the sense that this is a passage in which it takes place in what you might call a spirit yard. And the dead have come back. And it is something of the music and the bass rhythm the novel is subtitled A Novel in Bass Rhythm. The bass rhythm, the bass of the music in the context of this book has the power to call back the dead. So the dead have been called back, including some famous ones, Bob Marley, but some other characters as well. So they have been called back. I think that's all that you need to know in this chapter. And there are a bunch of spirits in the yard, and they are waiting for Bob to come into the yard. The others have been waiting for his arrival in the eye. The bass rhythm of the people has called them too. They lean against the zinc fence or sit on their haunches. Some of them have bongo drums. There is a congregation of birds in an ackee tree, and the smell of corn roasting on hot coals. A red flag blows from a bamboo pole. A woman steps forward. They call me Queen Nanny, she says, Nanny of the Maroons. Is me could catch the white soldiers' bullets and spit them out. That is what the books say. But I used to do much more. I could grind a soldier's teeth and use the powder to light a good fire. I could spot one of them coming through the trees without turning around. I would feel it, the two red of their jackets on my bare arm. One of them would piss behind a tree, and I would hear it a mile off. If the books really said all, the very ink would stink of blood. Let's leave it at that. But see me here, the people have called. I have heard their new time music beating the ground and the feet of the children dancing. Their hopefulness mixed with pain. Listen to me. There is an echo which travels along fault lines. It comes from their music, the strange music of the people. Sometimes the earth shudders and our bones move in their graves. How can we not arise? Up, up, ye mighty, someone sings. An elder steps forward. He has long gray locks that touch his knees. He carries a staff carved with a lion of Judah. My name is Leonard, he says. Leonard Howell. They call me the first Rasta, but that don't matter now. And they call me a thief. Same like they call Garvey. Said I tricked the people with false tickets to Ethiopia. Thief or not, I had a vision. History needed me to keep the wheel turning. Yes, I come now to organize, to buoy the people up, up, to higher groundation. Praises. Another woman steps forward. Her head is tied with a piece of flour bag. One furious plait twines against her face. Me don't have no name, she says. Everybody forget it, and now not even me can remember it. It happened like that to plenty of we. We sow and plant and cook and sweep and wash and scrub and reap and stir and cry and pray and bend over and scream and break with back and then hold it straight again to send the children to school with piece of pencil so they can learn to write the book of our story and never forget it. I heard the babies crying from my grave, my grands and my grands' grands, and how could I not return mercy? A little girl wipes tears from her eyes. It was election time and gunshot flying to my face, straight up my nose, she says. Me step in front to save my brother. He was only 3, and mama said to mind him while she go look one tin of mackerel. Me catch the shot just like Nanny, only it killed me. Me name Hortense, but them call me Tensie. From over this side, I hear my brother. Big man, he is now clicking a gun, and the sound of the click make my bones them tremble. Don't I call out, but he can't hear me. I want to stop him. Help me stop him. Stop the violence. The people must stop it. It's long time we have warned them. A man steps forward. It is Garvey. He wears a green velvet vest under a black jacket. He has a hat of plumes. We must hold together now, he says. If the living have no hindsight, then we must be that hindsight. If the living have no foresight, then we must be that foresight. If the living have no wind, then we must be that wind. If the living have no fire, then we must be that fire. Up, up, let us be the terror and the tenderness, the storm and the lullaby. Let us whirl together as one mighty force. Enough of the preaching to Ra, a woman calls. She wears short shorts and long white boots. Is Patsy me name? Even in the grave, my feet keep dance hall. Me's a dance hall rebel woman. Is a rebel dance me a dance. But if you look, the moves good, this is Africa them come from. But the people don't know that. And me never know it neither. Is Mother Nanny tell me. Is them kind of thing we need to tell the people. We don't need no more preaching. Back to Africa. The people need Africa. Garvey takes off his hat and holds it against his belly. Sister, you are right. This time we need a ship of a different kind. The people must return to Africa on fleets of the mind. This is where Zion lives. Yes, I. We need a plan, Nanny says. Something great, same as we imagine we nation, yet simple as a goat's milk. That's how the Maroons defeated the enemy. Who would have believed that we could defeat the British with a few roots and river stones and salsa weeds? A woman dressed in white beats a drum between her knees. 3 times 3. Tears run down her face. Her lips tremble. 3 times 3. Her hands call, sound uprising, and skin deliverance. But how shall we start? The drums stop. The woman falls to the ground, her body shaking. Someone sprinkles her with white rum. She lets out a sigh, and everybody is quiet. With the children, Bob says. He steps forward into the circle, still wet from the storm. My name is Robert Nesta Marley. I man used to play music, but before that me was a boy, had a pain in me heart. My heart so heavy, it dropped with a one drop. Is music and Rastafari save me, but everybody don't so lucky. The youth them, me hear them bawl at night outside in the road, and when them eye water dry up, them beat them one another. Is them we must start with one mighty force, calls Garvey. The little youth shall lead us. One by one we must build an army. Sila. Somewhere, a lizard begins to sing. The young girl Hortense rises up, and Bob gives her the drum. Her small hands beat the skin, chanting down Babylon. The spirits sing Nyabingi, and Nanny dances in the circle. She grasps the hem of her skirt as her feet inch the ground, working the perimeter. There is a scent of white rum and a swirl of mango leaf and bird feather. And this is what the drum speaks. Zion train coming, Zion train coming. People get ready, Zion train coming. Zion is a place inside, calls Garvey. And this is what the drum speaks. Set the children free, set the children free. Patsy zips up her boots and dances with Nanny in the circle. Who can't sing, clap? Who can't clap, testify? Who can't testify dance, she calls. Her knees dip and part. A drought travels her spine and rises to her head. It pushes at the space between her scalp and funeral wig. She closes her eyes and whispers, "Raw." And this is what the drums speak. Zion train coming, Zion train coming. Children get ready, Zion train coming. And the woman with the furious plait begins to cry, for she sees her great-grands far, far on the other side. They have her guinea cheekbones and ashy skin. Zion is a place inside, she calls, hoping they will hear. And her bare feet dance the words into the dust of the dirt yard. Zion is, her heels treading faster. Zion is, go the drums. And spirit feet massage the ground. For this is the real reason there are almost 200 little earthquakes on this island per year, and why you should pay attention when the photo on the living room wall shifts sideways, your feet unsteady in the hallway. For this is how the long dead rock our fever babies or shake the youth from don't care. I'll stop there.
Oh my goodness, Marcia. Thank you. Wow. 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 Yeah. I wanted to maybe just start by just inspiration. One of the things I've been interested in is sort of the kind of the genre of the musical novel in different traditions. Dawnie, your work, you kind of is categorized a little bit under the category of the rock novel, and without giving any spoilers, there's a big kind of turn in the novel in terms of genre and musical idiom and kind of focus. But there's a broader tradition, especially in the US, about the rock star, character, the musical life. And so we have novels like Nick Hornby's High Fidelity, Taylor Jenkins Reid, Daisy Jones and the Six. So there's a tradition in kind of US fiction that's deeply interested in the rock star life and what it means to be a musician and the journey, and so there's a kind of arc, right, that the rock novel has that seems kind of really interesting to novelists broadly. But I was curious about what inspired you to write this novel. Did you begin thinking about your musical characters, and particularly did you how did you come up with this amazing duo of a white Beatles-esque songwriter and a Black punk rock badass that is Opal?
Thank you so much for those kind words. And when we were sort of chatting before everyone came in for the event, we were talking about the magic of the first novel and how in many ways the first novel feels like the thing you've been trying to say your whole life, ever since you thought maybe you want to write a book. And that was this book for me. And that was because, I grew up in Florida, North Florida, Jacksonville, which at the time I was born in 1976, so really came of age in the 80s and early 90s, was incredibly segregated. And I grew up sort of with this taboo love of rock and roll music. My parents liked all kinds of stuff. We had everything from jazz records to, songs in the key of life, Stevie Wonder. My mother loved James Taylor. So there was always this sort of melange going on. But when I was a teenager, it was sort of the era of alternative rock kind of coming to the forefront, and it was music that felt dangerous and music that felt dangerous for someone like me to like, because people who looked like me had seemingly been excluded from it. And so all my life I was grappling with this. why did I love this music and what did it mean if I rarely saw myself inside of it? Um, and then, you know, I kind of had a whole career in journalism, worked for many years at Entertainment Weekly, which, you know, learning about the oral history form, which I really liked for many reasons. But the real kind of thing that directly inspired me, I'm often inspired by different forms of art, including film. And in 2012, 2013, I saw 20 Feet from Stardom, which was a documentary. It won the Oscar that year, actually. And it was about backup singers, many of them Black women, who contributed to some of the biggest rock records.
Yeah.
And we didn't know their names, we didn't know what they looked like. But they're the voices you hear on everything from Sweet Home Alabama to songs by the Talking Heads. And they had never really gotten their shine. And this documentary was giving them shine. And at the very beginning of the documentary, there was footage from the Talking Heads concert film, Stop Making Sense. I love Talking Heads. I have, like, for a really long time, those weird videos with David Byrne in the boxy suit and like dancing all crazy. But from the concert footage they showed, you see David Byrne at center doing his David Byrne thing, and then the camera shifts to the left and you see the two beautiful Black women who are giving the music sort of a lift. And I describe it as I felt this urge to pull one of those women to center stage with David Byrne. And so it started as sort of like a visual that I saw in my head of these two weird characters, people who seem like they're completely opposite from each other in every way, and what would bring these people together to make music. But the difference is, in my novel, in the idea that we writers have of trying to like create something in the world that we want to exist. I wanted Opal to be the star. I wanted her to not only be on equal footing with Nev, but in many ways to be more of a consequential figure to Nev. And so that was sort of like the kernel of the book. And you know, I wrote it in the oral history form because I was familiar with it, and I love that form for the way in real life, when people are reminiscing, the memories differ. And I love the idea of the reader becoming part of the narrative and deciding where the truth is between how everyone is presenting themselves. I loved the challenge of making each voice have its own music and have its own distinction. And it was just a lot of fun to write. So that was the inspiration for the story, and the characters themselves, many inspirations there. Opal is a mix of Jamaican, Grace Jones, for her style and
You
her
could tell. You could
grace.
tell the hair and the style. Yes, definitely. Yeah.
For sure. All the imagery in the book is Grace. The music itself, I thought of Nona Hendrix, who was 1/3 of LaBelle, who is actually, and I should say, you know, a lot of bands, a lot of groups were sort of not characterized as rock when they actually were, and LaBelle was a rock band. And the first Black woman group on the cover of Rolling Stone. And I loved their audience, which was extremely weird and diverse in terms of not only race, but age and the walks of life people came from who loved LaBelle. And then political sensibilities, Nina Simone, you know, Opal is very political. She believes that art is activism, and that was an important piece of it. Opal is basically like the rock star that I would have proudly stand and like had posters on my bedroom wall as a teenager. I yearned for her, and so I created her.
Yeah, and there's a moment in the one of my favorite moments of many favorite moments when our journalist character, our frame narrative Sunny, kind of gives us a spiel really early in the novel where she says that, right, a really kind of personal appeal as a fan first and not a journalist first. And
Yeah.
then just you know, by the end of the novel, we have an extended moment when we and Sunny become fans of Opal in a moment, and it's so lovely to hear the inspiration about that. I'll come back and ask you some more about rock and kind of Black artists and rock a little bit later. But Marcia, in the Caribbean, especially in Jamaica, the rock star novel isn't really our wheelhouse, but we have a broader kind of regional tradition around kind of calypso and literature. And in Jamaica, we're both from, sort of reggae and literature and dancehall and literature. When your book came out, it was sort of in a wave with most immediately Marlon James' A Brief History of Seven Killings, which has a character called a singer who is basically kind of Bob Marley from the archives. Your novel, can take a different track and is subtitled, as you said, a novel in bass rhythm. And I'd love to just kind of hear you talk a little bit about what inspired you to write a novel with a fictional Bob, and you call him Bob, and he's identifiably Bob Marley, but also not necessarily the Bob that we know in his life. It begins with his death, and so it's a fictional Bob and a kind of post-death, resurrected, afterlife, fallen angel kind of Bob Marley. What was the inspiration for that story and the form that the novel takes, particularly with kind of tracks and dub engineering and all the wonderful, juicy kind of sonic details that you've included?
Yeah, thank you. I would say that the seed, it's hard to track back to the very first seed of a novel, but one of the things which began it for me would be there's this story of Bob Marley's ring. When Bob was alive, he supposedly received this ring from Haile Selassie. And there's a story around this ring that he got from Haile Selassie, that it had gold in it, which had belonged to King Solomon's ring. Whether any of this is true or not, I do not know. But this is the story which surrounds the ring that Bob received from Haile Selassie. So when Bob Marley died, there was a lot of controversy about what happened to the ring. Lots of conflicting stories, I should say. The main story was that he was buried with the ring. But then there were these other theories about what happened to the ring and who had it. And there was even a lot of bitterness and anger around that too. So I thought that the story would really be about the ring. And in a way it is, but that's kind of where it started. But as Bob would say, it was about more than material things. It verged into something else, which began to take on some mystical or spiritual themes as well. So here I am writing this story with Bob Marley as a character. You can't separate Bob from the music. You also cannot separate Jamaica from the music as well. Reggae is just the premier soundtrack of Jamaica, whether you like reggae or not. It's everywhere. It's on the street, it's on the bus, it's everywhere. And so this became the soundtrack of the novel, and the reggae became intertwined with the spirituality and the mysticism as well. And then, so that's how it blossomed. And I really found myself leaning into who I am as well, and also what formed me growing up in Kingston. So as I said, reggae is everywhere. I would go to church with my parents and people would be speaking in tongues and clapping their hands. But there would be the reggae down the street competing with the church music. And it was this thing which, you have the church music layering on top of the reggae music. And I feel as if that's a good example of how it is in Jamaica, where the reggae somehow is just layered over everything one way or another. So I knew that the novel had to engage with the music as well. And then it became something of a structural device as well in other sorts of ways. It wasn't enough just to have the music in it, but it became an integral part of the whole sensibility of the book, in the same way that the music is an integral part of the whole sensibility of the Jamaican experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and this is really great. And I could perhaps follow up with you on that, because I'm really, some of you in the audience will have perhaps seen the most recent Bob Marley film, One Love, and then there are kind of rock documentaries and rock films aplenty. You both kind of mentioned in some way or another kind of soundtracks, right? And we're kind of familiar with how soundtracks work in a film, right? A film is audio and visual, and we can actually hear some of that. When you're both reading, there are moments when you're using your prose to capture, just with words, something that we would hear if we were, listening to an album or watching a film. But your novels are not just kind of right. Music is not just a soundtrack in novels, as Marcia says. And if you haven't read Marcia's novel, just the form, just flipping the pages is a delight. I mean, the chapters, what we expect as chapters in a novel are labeled tracks in many places, and so there are moments when you're actually remixing known lyrics into the prose in a seamless way. Earlier when you were reading and you were saying Zion, 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 I mean, that you were literally enacting a reverb on the page, right? So there are features of both your novels that are not just soundtracking music, but are deeply influenced by the form as well as the political resonance, I've heard you both say, of the particular music form. So I just want to invite you, Marcia, if you'd start just talking a little bit more about why reggae and why bass rhythm and dub. There's a moment, many moments, but there's one of my favorite ones. It's in a latter section of the book where the section is titled, I think it's Kingston Ring Tune. And so it's just kind of multiple voices of different children who are encountering our fictional kind of Reverend Bob. And so it's the moment, it's called Singing Boy. And so he's meeting this Bob who's not quite Bob. And this Rasta man says to him, I want to teach you to chant Don Babylon, he say. Sing, he say, and I sing. And this is in kind of Roman, just kind of regular prose, but we can hear the songfulness of it. So this is like a lyric right on the page. If this were a film, we would hear it. On the page, we don't, but we kind of do. And it's wool concrete and sugar and water tears, and it's, make a drum from the bucket, and we chant down Babylon, every badness in it, and this idea of singing of freedom. And this is something that it's been transmitted from or historical real Bob to the fictional Bob and then to our characters. I just want to invite you to talk a little bit about, what's both the formal and the political resonance for you of reggae or bass rhythm that you've brought into this novel.
Thanks for mentioning that passage. I actually thought about reading that passage, but it's very short. But I think it's useful, as you point out, to illustrate some things. Bass rhythm, reggae is only as good as the bass. And I'm thinking of bass rhythm as being something which is fundamental, something which is rooted, something which has almost a type of frequency, you might say, which is why in the context of this novel, the bass rhythm, the roots on the ground feel the rhythm, and it has the power to pull back the dead, to call back the dead. So the bassness, the bassness of the rhythm is almost like an entity. It's powerful. It's a force, is what I mean to say. It's an energy. But that's how I'm using It has power. And it also is therefore intertwined with the history of the island and the history of the people as well. So it's more than just making music, it's performing, enacting a certain agency and power, you might say. I'm forgetting the last part of your question.
No, I'm just thinking about, yes, both kind of the formal and the political, because like you said, it's influencing how the novel is structured, but it's carrying resonances. I mean, this is a novel that's deeply about history and memory and trauma and community and so on. And the music seems to be kind of narrative engine, but also sort of kind of thematic and kind of historical engine as well.
Yeah. And there is rebelliousness in it as well.
Yeah.
And there's resistance also. And there is also this assertion of something new, you might say. If you think about how reggae came to be formed, when we think of our language in Jamaica, right? I like the term that Breathwaite used, nation language, but you can call it patois or dialect, but I like nation language, which is a new language. And it's something which came about via the experience of the West African slaves who came from many ethnic groups, the various colonizers, the Spanish and the English. And this historical experience created something new, a new way of speaking, a new way of communicating. In the Caribbean, we're in the business of newness and of creating, that which has been given to us. And turn your hand, make fashion. You know this expression, right?
Sort of improvising in all its forms. Yeah.
Right. Yes. And reggae came about in a similar way as well. It is a fusion of West African drumming, R&B, gospel music, various influences came to create this new form, reggae. So there is this history of innovation. We can even speak about the subgenre of dub music in Jamaica. Dub is a subgenre of reggae, and that came about from really a mistake in a recording studio where the engineer back in the 60s, in the days of making vinyl records, the engineer intended to put vocals on the dub plate, but left it out by mistake. They decided that they would go ahead and play it without the vocals at the dance hall, and it was a hit. And this is how dub music was born. And then they started playing with the form and they started adding things to it, like random sounds. It could even be a cow mooing, or maybe the DJ would just talk over it. But they started playing with the form, and that's how dub came to emerge as a genre. And so this is another example of innovation and something that comes about, out of a certain situation or a certain circumstance, a creative form which emerges. So I'm thinking of, this history of creativity and what I, as a writer, can do with that on the page when I'm thinking about sound and rhythm and Jamaican music.
No, that's great. And you can see that, right? The sense of and I'm pinging back to Dawnie here, because in a way, as you're saying that, Marcia, I'm thinking about how this is one of the things that both novels share formally and thematically, that the genre that you've centered at the heart of your story inspires experimentation with form. Dawnie, could you talk a little bit, basically the same question, but about sort of this turn really to kind of opal. So from the Beatles-esque Nev and his songwriting and writing genius, to really thinking about not just blues and rock and what Black musicians mean, but also Black musicians in American history. So without giving too much away, this novel is thinking a lot about, race records for the history of race. It begins, with the civil rights movement, and a lot of the songs and references are kind of pinging that history. Can you talk a little bit, similar question about what are the kind of political resonances that kind of seep into the novel, kind of because you're writing about these music forms?
Yeah. Well, I think because I was kind of grappling with my own complicated feelings about loving this music, and I was thinking a lot about the irony to me that is rock and roll, which is that it's Black music. Like that is the main thing that we need to understand. It's a melange of blues, gospel, the experimentation of jazz. And yet, as in so many things in American culture, it at some point was capitalized. It was, genres were sort of created and they were very much racialized to the point where it's like, you know, rock and roll belongs to white people, R&B belongs to Black people, and never should that mix, even though musically it all was, but the way that it was presented to the world or sort of consumed, marketed, which is, a lot of what was happening in the 80s and 90s when I was coming of age. So that was a lot on my mind. And I was also sort of, when I was thinking of Opal as someone who would have been an idol for me, I was grappling with the idea of whether I thought she actually could have lasted at all, whether she really could have existed in the world. And so a lot of the story, a lot of what happens was sort of thinking through that, like how would this woman come to fame? And for me, it would not be sort of like the traditional way, like she doesn't sort of burst onto the scene after an amazing album, even though she makes incredible music and all of that. It would be more like, not to give anything in the book away, but sort of this very sort of news-making, infamous, kind of tragic moment that sort of launches her into infamy. And then she kind of uses that platform and for that brief moment has a presence, So I was thinking about all of that politically. And I was thinking about, I talked about Opal and her influences, but I have to talk about Nev for a second because I was thinking about the freedom that white men enjoy in rock. And I was thinking about the chameleonic figure. A lot of artists I really love, right? Like David Bowie, like Elton John, these artists who have these decade-long careers and are able to sort of switch their physical style, switch the style of music, try different things. And they're always sort of given that leeway to do that. And so was kind of also, when I was drawing the Opal character, thinking about the kind of boxes that she would have been in. Not only, because of the industry or the way that she was received politically, but because unlike Nev, she is an activist and she knows that her presence and what she does with her platform has consequences. And so she is also sort of like always carrying the responsibilities that she feels toward her audience and the messages that she's putting out. So that was a lot of like,
and with greater risk, and with so much risk to her that Nev doesn't experience.
Absolutely, yeah. So that was a lot of the politics. In terms of the music itself, I don't know anything really technically about music. I only know how it makes me feel, and so that's how it was.
Okay, but okay. So if anybody's read Opal and Nev, right? this is the part that feels hardest. And so as you're going to say that, let me just maybe throw
Yeah.
a little prime the pump a little bit, because and this is true too for Marcia, for your novel, and so I invite you to talk about that too. These feel like, so as novelists, we often think about, okay, so precise detail, sensory detail, good description, all of that is in both of these books. But the deep, authentic insider knowledge you both bring to your prose, I mean, so Dawnie, I mean, in this part you read, but all throughout the book, it's not just like like great music journalism. It's also technical knowledge of, like, you know, a recording session. It's it's deep. I mean, I'm a songwriter, and those Nev passages were deeply authentic to me.
Oh,
And you know, so for our audience who are, you know, writers, you know, at all different stages, what is the secret? What is the secret to crafting? I mean, you talked about, you know, crafting a character like Opal is like really just someone who you feel is a real person you could Google and go listen to her album. But the prose and the details that feel like you have to go study ethnomusicology and music theory, what's the secret? Were there particular archives, or I mean, I know you're a journalist, and so you kind of have that background, but how do I do this? How do the rest of us plebs do this
for
kind
me,
of work?
yeah, it was really following rabbit holes of obsession, you know? And I hate to use the term research because I feel like that kind of makes it feel more formal than it was. But I did do some archival work. You know, I did dig into the archives of Rolling Stone to see about how certain artists were written about in 1971. I also was very careful. I feel like it's very difficult to not include real history
Yeah.
in my work, because I feel like that the real history that the artists are living is going to affect what they're playing and thinking about and what they're projecting onto the world. So I was integrating, you know, there were some things that um, I sort of like carefully selected to be part of that history. I can't write about, you know, the early 70s and not talk about Vietnam. I can't
Mhm.
talk about Opal being from Detroit and not talk about her roots in Birmingham and her going down there for the summers and the 16th Street church bombing. I can't not include that. So that was a piece of it and a piece of what forms her as an artist. And I also, funny enough, you know, I can't listen to music when I'm writing, but I
Mm.
certainly, you know, when I'm away from the page and I'm, you know, just like washing dishes or whatever, I'm listening to music or watching old talk show clips, you know, a lot of Dick Cavett clips. All kind of and it was just because it was my obsession. It didn't feel like work, and it wasn't like I was ever looking for specific things, except for some of the Rivington Showcase stuff. I was looking for
Mm.
specific things around about Southern rock bands. But it just kind of was osmosis, I think, and helped to kind of inform the characters and what they experience.
Yeah. Marcia, same question. And then your novel, so Donnie's novel kind of explicitly content-wise, the kind of musical process. Your novel, one of the things I love most about it is it's embodying dub engineering and sound engineering practice, and formally it feels like a dub mix. But you're also, I mean, you're literalizing reverb or echo, or you're literalizing, right, that what you talked about earlier about how do you drop voices out and kind of fade voices in. um what's the secret to that? Do you have to go study, you know? Do you have to go sit in a studio at Lee Scratch Perry? And you know, what was your process of really kind of crafting these kind of sonorous details that are so delightful to us as a reader?
You know, there is some research that goes into it, but what I would say more importantly beyond that is just being a deep listener of music. And I just really listen to a lot of reggae. I love reggae, is what I do anyway. And in writing the book, I listen to it even more consciously and deliberately. That's what I would say. You know, it's a music that I feel connected to. It's the music that I listen to when I want to transport myself home. It's how I survive being an immigrant, is listening to reggae music. I love it. It's therapy. It does things for me. I get it. You know, I can feel it in every cell of my body. And I think it's that connection to the music which is felt on the page. That's what I would say, and I don't know how to explain it any other way, except that I'm a close listener of the music and I seek it out. I understand it, you know, and feeling to that bass. You know? And you know, as you know, reggae operates in different ways, you know, such as dub music. You know, it can have this really trance-like effect. And so the dub side of the novel felt like a good space to have the spirit side moments, you know, when Bob is interacting with Haile Selassie, for instance, because it is that sort of zoned out space where it's just you and the bass, you and the bass, you and the bass. You know, there's something mystical and spirit about that. But there's also this other kind of reggae bass that can be very erotic as well. And, you know, the Lena Bob passages, you know, they kind of lean into that sort of experience as well. So, you know, just being something of a, you know, a really artful listener, I would say. Language is music in the end. And so language is music. So, you know, I listen to the music and then I play it in the language. Something like that. Maybe there's a better way of saying this.
No, I love that you even say to play it in the language, right? The novel becomes a record, you know, like a vinyl record that you're playing in the words and the reader, right? That response. We have some time for questions from the audience if you want to post them in the chat or raise your hand. And if Melissa or Scott can help me notice if there are raised hands or questions. Thank you. Thanks, Scott. Roni, hi, Roni. Roni has a question from Marcia. Hello, and thank you. I was recently introduced to the work of Miss Louise Bennett Coverley. Roni is one of our poet alums, brilliant poet. So Roni says she just was introduced to Miss Lou's poetry, a huge part of Jamaican households through her radio readings, who celebrated patois, nation language. What was your childhood memory of music? She's asking Marcia.
Yeah, my childhood memory of music. I touched on that a little bit, given the example of my parents in church and the gospel, but the reggae down the road. My childhood experience and memory of music is that, you know, there was always music everywhere, you know, one way or another. You know, if you live in Kingston and you grow up in Kingston, there are always these parties going on in certain neighborhoods, you know, and I remember I have lots of memories of Kingston. Even if you're not at a party, you can hear the party. At least that's how it was in our neighborhood, our part of Kingston. You know, it would be the sound system down the road and the dogs barking, these two things.
It's something about like every street corner and then competing so the church and the sound system, but then multiple sound systems competing in one space.
Right.
Yeah, we have
Late
a,
at night,
yeah,
and the dogs
late
just
at
going,
night.
they're just going,
Yeah.
going. So,
And the neighbors, and yeah.
yeah.
We got
So
a
that
question
was my
from, oh, sorry, go
experience.
ahead. Yeah, yeah, thanks for that. We have a question from Sharma Taylor, a wonderful Caribbean, Jamaican novelist. Sharma says, hi, Marcia, and oops, I lost it. Here it comes. Well, also, what was the most challenging part of crafting and editing the books, and how do you overcome it? And Dawnie, if you want to jump in on that too, because one of the things that I imagine, especially since these novels are really so experimental formally, but also they actually do tackle deep political things that some people might not want to consider. Did you have any challenges editing and working, both crafting and editing the novels? Sharma's asking. Marcia and Dawnie.
Challenges of editing and crafting the novel. I love what I do, and it's a slow process. And I feel that there's something of the writing process which comes with challenges, but you work through them. I think my main challenge was actually getting the novel published, if I'm really to be honest. And that's because it's not a conventional novel. But it ended up being a blessing too. It took a long time to get published, and that just gave me more time to polish it even more.
Yeah, thanks, Marcia. Dawnie.
Yeah, the most challenging part of crafting is that I'm a pantser, not a plotter.
You're an improviser, you're a blues artist.
Yeah, right. So, Njara, as you know, there's sort of a moment that ends part 2 of the book that is sort of, I call the record scratch moment. And I still remember the day that I wrote it, and I didn't know that it was going to happen. There's a revelation that is uttered on the page. And when I wrote it, after that, I was stuck for months because I had to figure out how to solve some of the very sticky and interesting questions that I had created for myself in this revelation. So it was just, and I'm not a patient person, so I felt like to that point I had a good momentum going with the novel, and then it just all stopped while I had to sort of take a moment, step back, and really think about these characters. And then in the editing, I actually sort of the biggest edit that I did was with my agent when my agent picked up the novel. And that was, he very much encouraged me to lean into something that I wanted to do, but didn't have the courage yet to do, which was to, really understand that this was Opal's story, even though the title is Opal and Nev, and it has to do with these two people, to really bring her forth a lot more. And so the whole second part of the book and the editing did change. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. I got a couple more. Is it Jennifer? Sorry, I keep losing because I'm scrolling and it keeps moving. It's Jennifer Strange. What are your personal soundtracks? So Jennifer says, so appreciative of your artistry, originality, and time. What are your personal soundtracks this spring? I love that. And did you have a soundtrack when you were writing?
About this artist, I'm all about Doechii. Doechii to me is 100% Opal. Like look, style, attitude, content of the music, politically. I just love her. And it's interesting, she's getting more popular now, but I remember like maybe 3 years ago, I was watching the BET Awards, and they had like sort of this, they had like this segment for like new and next artists, and Doechii came on and performed this song called Crazy that she does.
Oh my God, yes.
You know Crazy? You know which one?
Yeah, really
The
early.
way that song ramps up, like it feels very punk to me. And I can't describe like musically what that means, like technically or chord progressions or any of that. I only know how music makes me feel in my body. And I think this is following up, Marcia, on some of the things that you were expressing. Whenever I see an artist that like really excites me, it's almost a fear response. It's like goosebumps. It's like I don't know what to do with myself and my body. And that's how I feel sometimes when I watch Doechii. I think she's incredibly exciting. So all about her right now.
I love that so much. Right? That and both of your novels really kind of show us that um being a fan of music. I think Marcia said being a deep listener, but also being a fan, just loving the artist and loving the music comes out on the page. Oh, nice. Marcia, what are you listening to? What's on your playlist now, or even when you're writing? Do you have a playlist when you're writing?
Past few days I've been listening to Janine, an old favorite of mine. I feel that her music is just really good, conscious roots reggae music, deeply spiritual. You know, I enjoy her sound, but also her message as well. And another thing that I listened to very recently, there's a classical musician, Sheku, and he plays Bob Marley's Redemption song on cello.
Ooh, wow.
And it's just really, really gorgeous. I recommend Sheku Redemption song on cello. Listen to it and see what that does to you.
Guess what? I literally, every time I teach her a book, I always pair it with Janine. Janine is doing just amazing stuff with Rastafari message, temporality, sound. So I'm so delighted to hear that. Thank you for sharing. Any other questions? We got a couple more minutes. If you have more questions, we'll be happy to take them. Is anybody with a raised hand that I can't see? Don't be shy. Ask your questions. Sharma wants to hear about your upcoming books. Oh, great. Dawnie, what can you share about? I've heard little bits and pieces of it, and it might have changed since you first shared, but tell us a little bit if you'd like about your coming book.
That scene I read is still in it, actually.
Oh, yay. So
It's a very different book, but similarly, it's sort of following different obsessions of mine, especially as I kind of move from my 40s into my 50s. This one is about longtime friendship between Black women who went to an HBCU together and how it changes over time, particularly in light of a scandal that erupts around one's marriage.
Juicy.
Yeah. That's all I can say about it right now.
Very
That's all I'll
juicy.
say.
Marcia, tell us about the new book that just came out. If you just joined us, Marcia's new novel, The Jamaican Archive of Shante Dreams and Many Beautiful Things.
The Jamaica collection of the Shante Archive. Yes, a long title. And then it has a subtitle too. So yeah, what should I say about this book? It's not a reggae book in the sense that Marvellous Equations is. However, there's definitely some of that sensibility there. That there is something of some of the devices which I use in Marvellous Equations, which carry over with this one. And there is also this understanding of a DJ that's kind of
Mhm.
threading throughout as well. So it has something in common with that. And you also mentioned the young girl Angela. Dub is this reverb. One of the dub devices I use in Marvellous Equations, the reverb. And that's this sound that comes, echoes and goes on and on and on into infinity, infinity. And I pick up on that with this one. In the Marvellous Equations, there is this voice of the young girl who says, "Mama," and it recurs in different ways as a reverb. There's a slave woman who's forced to jump off a ship, and her child called Mama. And there's also a more contemporary girl, Lena's daughter, who also calls Mama as well. And this begins with begins with a mention of that character, and the mama is also a reverb threaded into it as well. So I'm just kind of showing some of the connections between the two books, even though I haven't said what it's about. One thing is it's about a lot of things, but one thing it's about is that I'm looking at Dream as an archive, as an archival space. And the stories which we the various archives, archival spaces where we can find ourselves and our stories in Dream, and also in our imaginations and archive as well.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for everything you've shared. Thank you so much for your beautiful words. I am a huge you are my Opal, you're my Lena and Angela. You're just like so stunning masters of the craft, mistresses of the craft. And I'm so delighted to kind of discover the kind of echoes and reverbs across your work and the community you've set up for us younger writers, right? About how to live in sound, how to listen deeply, how to bring that across on the page. So much of your books connected with me personally. Your books are, about trauma and loss and history and memory, personal, familial, collective, and to really just see how you've really built a distinctive style in genre, but also in prose. It's just really delightful. I've been honored to share this time with you. So thank you so very much, Marcia and Dawnie.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I loved it.
Thank you also. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for the great questions. This has been very meaningful. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for attending. Thank you, Scott and Melissa.
Thank you so much. It was so riveting.
Thank you to the Pacific Basin, the Mapmakers Alumni Institute. We'll see you next time in the Zoomiverse. Take good care. Happy summer.
Bye.